So I bought this slice of yew tree on the internet, and it was about £11 to £15, including postage and packaging. My original intention was to keep the bark on. When the slice of yew arrived to me, it was quite wet and moist, so I placed it inside a container to slowly air dry it for possibly about 3 months. Within that time, the bark then appeared considerably dried out. So what I did, I carefully removed all the old bark that was on there, and then following that I had to remove all the pith that was around the actual wood. A wire brush helped to remove quite a lot of that pith. I was going around, and it sort of changed a bit of a different texture. As you can see here, there's a branch that was side shooting off, and then I had to give it a little bit of a tidy up around here and there. I bought this sander for about 25 quid off of eBay. I think it's like a 180 grit. Now comes the hard part. It's deciding where you're going to put the coins and all that sort of jazz. Took a little bit of time to decide where I wanted it. Obviously I've got the inserts through the years, and then the coins are going to be countersunk inside of the wood. Also, you've got to take in consideration the 3D shape of the material I was working with, where like around the edges it might appear to go down 2 centimeters, 20 mil. Obviously it tapers away, possibly underneath there, etc, etc. So you just had to make sure that like everything was clear before you marked up and then drilled down into it. So once I marked it out, I used, I think it was, I believe it was like a CB coaxial thing to just go down. And that sort of roughly gave me a shape. I think 21 millimeters was the rough size of a penny. So I kind of worked out all my measurements from that. As you see on the background, that is a ironing cover, so you can iron on the floor. And I've honestly found this thing is fantastic for most things. It's a bit shot away here and there, but I've used it for epoxying, I've used it for like drilling, I've used it for soldering. It tends to be soldering and heat shrinking, and it's generally quite good for protecting the carpet if you ain't got a workshop to work in. As you see, I'm just measuring out everything, making sure everything's okay to go and to drill down deep enough. And here we are drilling down. The first marks here are just roughly marking where the money is going to go, so to speak. And this tool here I had to buy, it was a 21 millimeter. They're not very common, so you have to look high and low for them. So as you can see, the wood that is being drilled out is actually quite wet. It hasn't, this actual plank hasn't been cured as such. It hasn't been air dried or kiln dried or anything like that. I had it in a plastic container, and just every so often opened the lid to let new air circulate in and around it. And it already started cracking, so I had to get on this and do it. As you can see down here by my thumb, there's a few cracking places down there. I've just placed in a few holes where we're actually put in the year significant to whatever we have done, and I'll go through that a bit later. Obviously they're all going to be different sizes. This is just a rough guide just to see where we pan out on. So now I'm just going to cover it all with Danish. This is the back here. As you can see, it's quite a rough cut from where the chainsaw and that went over. And then the sides and the edges. Now this is like obviously the Danish oil, so I'm just getting right deep into there to the cracks and the edges. That's the first concern, just to stop anything splitting any more than what it's already split by. And then we're just like rubbing over the whole surface, giving it a good wetting out. And this is just going to try and help the cracking process from becoming any more cracked than what it is, due to obviously how it's air dried. It is just a final step of protection. Help keep some of that moisture in there. And here we are. This is another coat on the top. We're just absolutely saturating the Danish oil in there. Let the wood take in as much as it can take in. I've tried putting on the Danish oil and then giving it a sand down whilst it's still wet. Whether this is supposed to bring up the grain a little bit quicker rather than waiting for it to dry, I personally think that it might have brought out the grain a little bit quicker. But I suppose every little bit helps. Like whilst that grain is wet, it's going to be lifted, and that's where you can then sand it off. So I probably went over this like 2 or 3 times just to try and get a nice finish on the wood. And you can see where the actual lines are taking place and how the tree grown. That was quite nice. To be honest, it would have looked nice if it had the bark still on it. So here I'm just going over the sanding of the coats once it's dried. Like, you have to excuse me, it's been a little while since I actually made this, possibly over a year. So I went over and just sanding over some of the parts that, you know, needed a little bit more attention and care and love than the other bits. Now this is the tricky bit. And this is the kind of bit where I went wrong in so many regards, as I was leveling the piece of wood to cut the holes. So I'd adjust just the height of each axis of the wood, or of each axis of the hole, to try and get like a uniform depth of hole. But at the same time, you have to realize that this wood is slightly concaved. So when I come to put the resin in a little bit later, that little slight concaveness kind of affected on how the resin set within the hole of each penny. So I would skip this bit. I really would. But maybe for another project this might come in handy. I use these kind of wedges that you use for work units and anything else that you need to kind of wedge in and up. So as you can see, the wood actually is still quite wet inside. Like once it's drilled in, you can see that moisture wood coming up. So I went through each of these ones, and I actually did catch it. I did give it a little bit of a nick, and this is what I'm doing now. I'm trying to sand out that little nick. Like here, as you can see, I'm just drilling down the different thicknesses of hole that I'll need for the material. Obviously some's leather, some's copper. Different thickness of that hole for that current year is going to be apparent. So some bits need to be slightly thicker than other bits. A bit later on we'll go through this, and I'll tell you exactly what I did when I did it, and the size of the hole. Maybe not the actual size of the hole. I'll go through and tell you the material I used in each of the different holes through the different years. So a little bit of a sand, clean, and try and keep everything as smooth as possible. Here I'm just trying to sand out that nick that I caught at the end of the drill bit. And again, still trying to sand it out. It's quite a deep scratch. Went over it a few times, laid in some more Danish oil, let it dry, sand it down, laid in some more Danish oil, let it dry, sand it down, and kept trying to do that to try and build it up. So here I am rolling up a bit of linen. This is obviously one of the years. That was significant. And here's the Mod Podge, and I'm not sure whether just normal PVA glue would have been just as good. Obviously let it dried a few times and done it onto the leather and the wood and a few of the other little bits that was more of an absorbent sort of material, and that would have sealed up any gaps for air to come out through the epoxy resin. So now we're cleaning up the pennies, a bit of vinegar, still vinegar, salt, rub them in. They love all that sort of stuff. They come out nice and cleany and shiny. And obviously every penny was of a different year after the wedding day. So here we are mixing out the epoxy resin. So people have been saying to get the resin up to room temperature. This will also help with bubbling. So that's what the 2 jugs are there for. And obviously everything's weighed out by measurement. And what I'm doing here is just layering in a good amount of resin to cover the holes. And I'm just going to poke in those pennies. In a certain line. Just going to give them a little straighten up. And then I'm just going to put a little bit of epoxy resin over the top. This has got about a 6-7 minute life span on it. Using the hairdryer just to heat up the resin, just obviously trying not to blow it too far and create a splash. Hopefully this will draw up any air bubbles to the top, to the surface, to give us a bit of a clearer image. And again I'm going to do exactly the same to the bottom parts. And then I'm going to do the same for infills with the different years. Give it a little shake. And this is what I was saying about the wood, where I had an equal level where the wood was as a whole. Obviously now it's not an equal level because it's kind of gone a little bit of a banana shape. So whether you would want to leave out that step next time is entirely up to you. Okay, what I've done here now is now it's all resin set nice and hard. As you can see where I've tried to wipe some of the smears off. And some of the blotches that's going to need sanding down. Then it's the waxing. What I've done is just got some little sticky labels, placed them over the tops of. So here I tried using this more of like a felt tip on the Dremel tool, and that sort of like kind of buffed out any of the oversplash. Okay, what I've opted for here is a Dremel tool. So here you can see the little splodges down here. So this is after buffing it up a little bit with the same tip. As you can see there's the ends are curling over on the stickers. That's where I sort of kind of tried to get right in there and just to relieve that resin, just to lift it up a little bit further. So the back bit was quite straightforward. It's felt. And then place the brass hanging fixture to the back of it. So in the end, the first hole was in fact paper, followed by the second hole was cotton, the third was leather, the fourth was linen, the fifth was wood, the seventh was copper. That's a bit of a debatable option. The 10th was tin, I used a bit of solder. The 20th was china. Now that was used from the china cutlery set, the china set that my parents got on their wedding day. The 25th was silver, bought a little bit of silver offline. The 30th was pearl, bought some pearls offline. There's loads of different pearls online, go and check them out. The 40th was ruby, I actually bought some ruby. It was certified, it said it was this, said it was that, bought that, and sunk that in and epoxied that in place as well.